for it. Today we're going to talk a little bit about incapacity planning. And, in the past, we've touched on this topic multiple times. The most recent time that we talked about Medicaid planning. Today we're going to talk about an aspect of planning that's very similar to Medicaid planning, but we call it VA planning, or Veterans Aid and Attendance Planning. So, most of us are living longer nowadays. Statistically, 72% of us are going to be getting to the point where some point in our life, we will need long-term care. And long-term care can be very expensive. And, the national average, I think, is somewhere around $80,000 a year for, around-the-clock care. And so, statistically, most of us will have the moment in our life where we need to worry about that. And the question is going to be, do you have a way to pay for it? And if you don't have a way to pay for it, there are default programs that you can fall under, like the Medicaid program, where the government will pay for it. The problem is that under Medicaid guidelines, you have to have less than $2,000 worth of value in all of your assets in order to qualify. Well, one of the programs that the government implemented to address this specifically for veterans, and this is for individuals who served in the military and also for their spouses, is a program called the Veterans Aid and Attendance Pension Benefit. And this is a program that basically the government and the military will pay a certain amount per month to help offset the costs of long-term care if you are a veteran that served during a qualifying wartime period. And there's some other, guidelines and aspects to it. But essentially, the military has posted on their websites the specific qualifying wartime periods that will work for somebody who wants to receive this pension. And this amount gets paid directly to you, and then you're able to use it to pay, doctors, skilled, nurses, or for around-the-clock care. But one of the nice things about this is that because it's in the form of a pension, you get to decide how you're going to use it, how you're going to accommodate it with your budget, as opposed to a lot of times people, that are on the Medicaid program or on other types of options, you don't really have the choice of how it's spent. They just cover the cost for you, and you have to be subject to the care in the facilities that will accept that program. With the aid and attendance benefits, you receive them, and then you get to spend them in whatever way makes sense. So you don't have to go into a veteran's facility. We have a VA long-term care facility here in the area in Utah, where our main office is. And we have a few clients that are receiving care there at that facility. I've been there a few times. It's a nice place. But you don't have to go into a veteran's facility to be able to receive the care. The aid and attendance benefits will pay out, and they will be available regardless of where you're receiving your care. So the key aspects to this is, number one, being able to qualify because you've served during a qualifying wartime period. And a lot of, anybody who served in World War II during any of the years of the war, that would obviously qualify. There are just a couple gaps of exceptions during the Korean War, or the Korean conflict and the Vietnam War, that, even if you're serving during those periods, and normally you would think it was qualifying wartime period, because of the way that the VA structures the years that qualify, you may or may not actually, benefit from it. And even if you only served one day during a qualifying wartime period, it still counts. So if most of your service was in the years following the war, but one day of your service was during a qualifying wartime period, then it still counts for you. You still can qualify. Even if you didn't see any conflict, even if you were stateside, the complete, your complete tour of service, that's okay too. you can still qualify. But in terms of the dates, it is very strict. So before applying, you will probably want to confirm that your service record has you serving during a qualifying wartime period in order to receive the benefits. The second thing is there are asset limits and guidelines for what you can own and how much assets you have or how much income you have in order to be able to receive the aid and attendance benefits, just like the Medicaid program has. And so in the past, the idea of planning around receiving these benefits is that you remove whatever assets that you own from your individual name and put them into a structure that's no longer owned by you. So we will often use irrevocable trust for that purpose. And when we put the assets inside of an irrevocable trust, for example, now you have an independent trustee. It's a completely separate entity from you. And because of that, it allows you to be able to qualify for benefits like Medicaid or VA benefits. Under the Medicaid guidelines, you can have less than $2,000 of value in order to qualify. Under the VA guidelines, traditionally, you can have somewhere in the range of $100,000 to $120,000. Nowadays, it's closer to about $60,000. That's kind of the benchmark that they look for. If you're over $60,000 in value, then it may be questionable, and if you're under $60,000 in value, then you're probably fine. But again, the idea of doing planning ahead of time to be able to qualify is what's usually necessary to be able to receive these benefits. And so what we find a lot of times is that individuals that had no idea that they could even qualify for these benefits, maybe they have a home, maybe they have a little bit of savings, right? And the total net worth ends up being a couple $100,000. And then they say, okay, now we have long-term care needs. Husband or wife is going into a long-term care facility. How are we going to pay for it? And that's when this planning really comes into effect. Up until 2.5 years ago, or about 3 years ago, it was pretty easy to be able to put things in place and remove assets from your estate and get you to qualify right away. So we could do the planning today, and tomorrow you'd be able to apply and be able to qualify for the benefits. Because of how many people in the future and currently are going to be needing long-term care, the VA has been forced to change some of their policies in terms of look-back periods of how long you have to have these structures in place before you can qualify and say that those assets were no longer yours. Under the Medicaid program, it's a 5-year look-back period, right? Federal guidelines say that they can look back 5 years, and anything that you've transferred during those 5 years, they can penalize you for. But then after 5 years, everything's protected. Under the VA guidelines, it's a 3-year window. So if you're going to need long-term care in the near future, and maybe the next couple years, we can help sit down, come up with strategies, look at options. Maybe you have life insurance that could be repurposed to pay for care. Maybe you have long-term care policies that will pay for a year or two of care, but then it'll run out. Maybe you have some assets that you'll have to self-pay for care for a little while before these things kick in. Or maybe you're already paying for care and you don't know that you could have qualified for these things. And once we put things in place, then it can just, help to subsidize or to minimize what you have to pay out of pocket. Those are all scenarios that might make sense. But regardless of the scenario, we pretty much want to try to get ahead of it as quick as possible. And we always recommend looking at it, about 5 years before you need it. Because regardless of whether it's the VA benefits or whether it's the Medicaid benefits, about 5 years is the window that's kind of the ideal time to plan. And what we find is, I sat down with a client, and he was in his late 50s. And he said, I'm worried about long-term care. My family has a history of that sort of thing, Alzheimer's and so on. And I want to make sure that we're taken care of and all of our assets are protected by doing like a Medicaid trust. And so we said, okay, great. Let's sit down. Let's look at it. And we explained to him how it would work and that he had to give up control of those assets. And he said, I don't know if I want to do that, right? Well, when you're in your late 50s, maybe you're not ready to give up that control. And maybe he won't need it until he's, 70 or so. So there's kind of a bigger window that you can take the risk a little bit more. Whereas sometimes what we find is that that we need to, address things more quickly and sooner for somebody who's in their mid 60s and they are ready to give up control, right? They're ready to have somebody put the kids or somebody else in charge of things, as long as they're going to be able to protect themselves and to be able to qualify for these benefits sooner rather than later. And so, planning around that makes sense. And so the target market to really help with this type of planning is, anybody in their mid to late 60s that is either needing long-term care support and, something to help them to be able to pay for long-term care in the next little bit or currently, or somebody who's worried about it for the future, and then we can position things to make sure that they're going to be able to receive it at some point soon. I remember sitting down with a veteran, and he said, as a veteran, there's a lot of benefits that we just don't know about, and nobody tells us about. And it's not really publicized because they may or may not actually want us to claim it, right? But they're there for us. So why isn't it something more widespread? Why don't more people know about this? And I don't know the complete answer. But what I will tell you is that, as a society, we've decided to put certain things in place to honor our veterans. If it's there and it's available to you, you don't want to lose out on it. So if this is the type of benefit that you've never heard of before, or if it's the type of benefit that you think might benefit you or maybe someone you know, this is worth sitting down and looking at, especially if you're in your, mid to late 60s and you're looking at the possibility of long-term care in the future and you're trying to strategize and look at an option to be able to plan around that. And we highly recommend sitting down with a financial professional to do that as part of your overall plan. And even if you're, getting close to the point where you need it, there may be options for you, right? This is one of those. So if we sit down, we look at your situation and say, okay, based on your needs, we can maybe get a little bit of money from the VA on this aid and attendance benefit. The minimum amount you would receive is somewhere around $250 a month, but it can go as high as a couple thousand a month. And so that can help offset significant costs. So let's say you're receiving aid and attendance pension benefits. And then in addition to that, maybe you have some long-term care coverage that can kick in. Or you have a life insurance policy that maybe can be used on a viatical settlement basis or something like that to pay for care. Maybe you have a situation where the kids are going to pay for part of your care, or they're renting from you. They're going to stay in your home, and they're going to pay, for your care in lieu of rent. So there's a lot of ways that we can work things out to try to optimize making sure that the family keeps the most value, but at the same time, making sure that you receive the most value in benefits to offset the cost of care. Long-term care is one of those things that it's probably the biggest drain on estates that exists. So there are three huge drains that we always talk about, right? Number one is the cost of long-term care. While you're still alive, before you pass away, the cost of health care and so on and so forth. Number two is taxes. And, right now, because of how high estate tax exemption limits are, taxes don't necessarily take as big of a chunk out of smaller estates, but it's still a significant risk for a lot of families, right? But it's kind of taken the secondary seat to healthcare costs. And then the third drain is, without a proper plan, the relationships that you have between family members and basically family conflicts is the third major drain for estates, because if there's a conflict of any kind, now things end up in court, or things end up, costing more money to try to resolve, or, maybe there's issues where a spendthrift in the family, somebody who's not good at spending money or saving money, they end up with the cash, and then all the money just disappears on them, right? So those are the three major drains on the estate. You notice that the first one is the cost of care, medical care, and long-term care. So, I think this is an area that often goes unplanned for. And there's a lot of practitioners out there that have certifications with the VA to actually assist you with sending in your application for your aid and attendance benefits. We have some of those practitioners in our law firm as well. And when you sit down with somebody that would help you to do that application, just be aware that the cost of the application itself and having somebody help you through that process is free. Nobody can charge you for that. However, in order to prepare to send in your application, to make sure that you're going to qualify, to have the structures in place, to make sure that whatever assets you own are going to be sheltered and you don't have to spend them all down in order to receive these benefits, that may cost you some money, right? And it's going to be based on the complexity of what you're putting in place. Maybe you're putting in, a regular estate plan along with your aid and attendance program or Medicaid plan. Maybe you're, having to address multiple properties and you're going to put structures in place for each of them. Maybe you just have one trust that we're setting up. So every situation is a little bit different, but there will be costs for that planning. And just remember that when you actually need help putting in the application, you can get that help if you're a qualifying veteran that would otherwise qualify for these benefits at no cost. And, of course, if you need somebody to connect with, we can always connect you with that sort of individual who can assist with that as well. So hopefully this is some valuable information. If you are a veteran and you want to learn more about this sort of thing, feel free to do a Google search. There's plenty of nonprofits that are dedicated to providing quality information about the veteran aid and attendance benefits and other benefits that you might be entitled to as a veteran. But if you want a consultation, you can always reach out to us as well. And we have, attorneys across the country. And, this is one of the areas of planning that we do significant work with. So every week we have this podcast. We will be doing it again next week. And we rotate through topics related to estate planning, tax planning, asset protection planning, legacy planning, and so forth. And so, next week we will be continuing that and have a little bit of a conversation regarding trusts and how those trusts become more complex as you go down with sub-trusts and planning for the next generation and putting conditions on those distributions. So appreciate you plugging in. And do we have any questions?
Only a small percentage of our listeners are actually subscribed, so make sure you hit that subscribe button and catch up on all of our latest podcasts.